Someone criticizes your work in a meeting. Maybe it's your manager, maybe it's a peer who's been quietly waiting for an opening. The words land, and before you've even finished processing them, you're already talking, explaining, clarifying, walking the room through your reasoning step by step. It feels necessary. It feels like the right thing to do. That instinct is the trap. Every time you explain yourself under pressure, you hand the other person control of the conversation. You accept their frame, you play on their terms, and you spend the rest of the exchange trying to prove something to someone who wasn't looking to be convinced. The Taoists had a word for what to do instead, buzheng, not passive silence, not pretending you didn't hear it, something more precise than either of those. By the end of this video, you'll have a concrete method for making conflict dissolve without ever needing to win the argument, because explanation is almost always the losing move, and there's a better one. Why you explain, and why it always backfires. Your brain doesn't distinguish cleanly between a sharp comment in a boardroom and a threat to your physical safety. Both activate the same fight or flight wiring, and when that system fires, it pushes you toward one thing: defend your position immediately. This isn't a character flaw, it's biology. The problem is that biology evolved for a world where speed mattered more than strategy, and in a modern workplace, the fast move is almost never the right one. So you explain, and the logic behind that feels completely sound. If I just lay out my reasoning clearly, they'll see where I was coming from, and the whole thing will settle down. That belief is one of the most reliably wrong assumptions you can carry into a professional environment. When someone challenges you in front of others, they're rarely doing it to gather information. They're testing something, signaling something, or working through something that has little to do with the actual content of what they said. A clear explanation doesn't address any of that. What actually happens when you explain under pressure is a sequence most people don't notice while it's unfolding. First, you validate the frame of the attack. By engaging with it seriously, you've implied it was serious enough to require a response. Second, you signal anxiety because composed people don't feel the need to justify themselves in real time. And third, you open the door to more probing because every answer you give generates another question, and the conversation now belongs to them. For high achievers, this gets harder, not easier. The more you've built a reputation, the more that reputation feels like something you need to protect in every room. So the stakes feel higher, the urge to correct the record feels stronger, and the willingness to just absorb a comment and move on feels impossible. But that's exactly where the cost gets highest too, because people in those rooms are watching you as much as they're listening to you. Picture this: a senior colleague questions your decision in front of the team. You launch into the methodology, the rationale, the context they probably don't have, and now the whole room has shifted. They're not watching someone take an unfair shot at you, they're watching you defend yourself. That's a different scene, and you walked into it voluntarily. The longer-term damage is subtler, but more serious. People learn from your reactions. If a question or a pointed comment reliably produces a long explanation from you, that's useful information for anyone who wants to knock you off balance. They don't even have to escalate. A single well-placed doubt is enough to get you talking, and once you're talking, they're leading. So, if explanation is the losing move, what did the Taoists actually prescribe instead? What buzheng actually is? Buzheng translates literally as not contending. It appears near the end of the Tao Te Ching, and Lao Tzu doesn't present it as advice for the weak or the passive. He frames it as the behavior of someone who has already won, someone who doesn't need the fight because they're operating from a place the fight can't reach. Before getting into what it actually is, it's worth clearing away what people assume it means, because the wrong version of this idea is everywhere. Buzheng is not suppression. Suppression is contention turned inward. You're still fighting, just against yourself instead of the other person, and it leaks out eventually in ways that are harder to control. It's also not passive aggression, which is contention wearing a mask. And it's not indifference, not the studied performance of not caring. All of those are still reactions. They're all still shaped by the attack. Bujeng isn't a reaction at all. The image Lao Tzu returns to throughout the Tao Te Ching is water. Water doesn't argue with the rock in its path. It doesn't push back, doesn't try to go through. It moves around, finds the low places, and keeps going. The rock sits there looking solid while the water just continues. Over time, the rock is worn smooth or bypassed entirely, and the water is still moving. That's not a metaphor about patience in a general sense. It's a description of how force actually works when one side refuses to absorb it. Socially, Bujeng operates on 3 levels at once. You don't match the energy of the attack, so there's no escalation. You don't accept the frame of the attack, so you're not playing on their terms. And you don't give the attack anything solid to push against, so the force behind it has nowhere to land. When someone comes at you with a challenge and you fire back, both of you are now locked in the same dynamic. When you don't fire back, they're locked in it alone. The psychological mechanic underneath this is straightforward once you see it. An attack carries emotional charge. That charge needs somewhere to go. It's looking for resistance, for a reaction, for confirmation that it landed. When you provide that, the charge discharges into the exchange and the argument continues. When you don't provide it, the charge collapses back on the person who generated it. They feel the awkwardness, they feel the overreach, and they usually do something to cover it, backpedaling, over-explaining, moving on faster than they planned. This is where it separates cleanly from weakness. Anyone can argue. Arguing requires nothing except a pulse and a strong opinion. Staying grounded while someone is challenging you in real time, keeping your voice level, not reaching for justification, that takes more self-control than most people have access to in the moment. Bujeng is a position of strength because of what it costs to hold it. Marcus Aurelius wrote about something close to this. He called it refusing to be moved by what cannot be controlled, not agreeing, not conceding, just not available for the collision. Understanding the principle is one thing. Knowing what to actually say and do in the moment is another. The Bujeng response in practice. The method breaks into 3 moves, and they work in sequence. Acknowledge without agreeing, pause without filling the silence, redirect without explaining. Each one does something specific, and together they completely change who's holding the weight of the exchange. Acknowledging without agreeing is the part people get wrong first. The instinct is to think that any acknowledgement is a concession, that saying "I hear you" means you're admitting fault. It doesn't. What it does is receive the comment without resistance. That's your read on it, or "okay, noted," lands the interaction without letting it hook into you. The other person has been heard, which is usually what they needed, but you haven't validated the substance of what they said. You've just refused to make it a fight. Most people can't tell the difference in the moment, and that's exactly what makes it work. Then you stop talking. Silence is the part of this that requires the most practice, because everything in you wants to fill it. After an accusation, silence feels like an admission. It feels like you're losing ground. But watch what actually happens when you hold it for 3 to 4 seconds. Instead of rushing to speak, the other person starts moving. They clarify, they soften, they backpedal slightly, they say something that gives away more than they intended. The silence doesn't belong to you. You're just the one comfortable enough to let it sit there. They're the one who needs to resolve it. From there you redirect, not with the defense of what you did, but with a question about what comes next. What would you want to see differently, or where do you want to take this from here? Shifts the entire frame. Now they're being asked to produce something, a solution, a preference, a direction instead of continuing to attack. It takes effort to criticize and criticize and criticize when the other person keeps quietly asking you to be constructive. Most people don't have that much gas in the tank. Put it in a real scenario. Your manager tells you your report missed the point. The old move is explaining your methodology, your sources, your timeline, why you made the choices you made. The Bujeng move is, okay, what would you want to see differently? Now your manager is working. They're building something instead of dismantling something, and the dynamic between you has quietly flipped without anyone announcing it. Your body matters here too. Before you respond, slow your breathing down, not dramatically, just enough to drop your shoulders and lower your heart rate slightly. Keep your voice at the same pitch it was before the comment landed. Don't lean forward. These aren't performance tricks. They're the physical signals of someone who isn't rattled, and people read them faster than they process your words. Composure isn't just a feeling, it's a posture, and a posture can be chosen even when the feeling isn't fully there yet. Over time, something shifts in how people relate to you. When pointed comments and loaded questions consistently produce nothing, no defensiveness, no scrambling, no drawn-out justification, people stop reaching for those tools around you. Not because they respect you more in some abstract sense, but because they've learned through experience that it doesn't get them anywhere. The pattern dies because you stopped feeding it. There's one situation where all of this gets harder though, when the criticism happens in public and your status feels like it's sitting right there on the table. When the stakes feel highest, public criticism and status threats. Public criticism is a different animal. When it's just you and one other person, the only thing at stake is that conversation. When it happens in a room full of people, suddenly everything you've built, every perception, every assumption people hold about your competence, feels like it's sitting right there getting evaluated in real time. That's not paranoia. That's an accurate read of what's happening, which is exactly why it's so hard to stay still when it hits. The specific trap high achievers fall into in group settings is this. They stop responding to the person who challenged them and start performing for the audience. The criticism becomes almost secondary. What they're really doing is managing the room's impression, laying out evidence, signaling that they had good reasons, showing everyone watching that they weren't just guessing. It feels strategic. It's actually the most transparent thing you can do, because the room isn't watching your argument, they're watching your composure, and a long defense under pressure reads as exactly one thing: rattled. Think about the people in your professional life who carry the most authority in a room. Not the loudest ones, not the ones who always have the sharpest rebuttal. The ones who, when something lands on them sideways, just stay level. They don't rush. They don't perform. When they do speak, it's brief, and because it's brief, it lands harder than 2 minutes of explanation ever would. What you're reading as authority is partly skill and experience, but a lot of it is just the signal that they don't need the room's approval to feel okay about what they did. That signal is what Bujeng produces, and the room picks it up instantly. The Bujeng move in a group setting isn't silence, it's compression. One sentence calm that moves things forward without defending anything. I'm open to looking at that differently. Let's put the data on the table. That's it. You haven't agreed that you were wrong. You haven't explained why you were right. You've just shown a room full of people that you can take a hit and keep moving, which is a more convincing demonstration of competence than any methodology walkthrough you could offer. The longer game matters here too. In any high-stakes environment, the person who gets trusted with more overtime isn't usually the one who wins the most arguments. It's the one who stays functional under pressure consistently. Arguments are remembered individually. Composure is remembered as a pattern, and patterns are what determine how people think about you when you're not in the room. Every time you hold the Bujeng position, Publicly, you're depositing into that pattern. Every time you over-explain under fire, you're drawing from it. Lao Tzu writes that the sage does not compete, so no one can compete with him. Read that slowly because it's not a spiritual claim about transcendence. It's a description of social mechanics. When you refuse to enter the competitive frame, there's no contest. The person pushing against you is pushing against nothing, and the room has just watched them do it. The inner work that makes Buzheng possible. None of what has been talked about works if you're genuinely coming apart on the inside. You can learn the 3-step method, you can practice the pause, you can memorize the redirect questions. But if there's real anxiety under the surface, the silence won't feel like composure. It'll feel like holding your breath, and holding your breath has a time limit. Eventually something cracks through, usually at the worst possible moment, and it comes out louder than it would have if you'd just responded in the first place. This is where Wu Wei comes in. Buzheng is the outward behavior, and Wu Wei is the interior state that makes it sustainable. Wu Wei is usually translated as effortless action, though that phrase doesn't quite catch it. What it actually points to is acting from a place where you're not straining against the current, where you're not white-knuckling your way through a response, but genuinely not needing the moment to go a particular way. Buzheng practiced from that interior state isn't suppression. It's actually the most natural move available because you're not fighting the urge to defend yourself. The urge just isn't that loud. Getting there requires an honest question. When someone criticizes you and you feel the pull to explain, what are you actually protecting? Usually it collapses into one of a few things: the fear of being seen as incompetent, the fear of losing standing with people whose opinion matters to you, or the fear that being wrong here costs you something concrete. Those fears deserve a real look, not as therapy, but as strategy, because most of the time, when you trace the fear to its actual endpoint, the cost of staying quiet is far smaller than it felt in the moment. A simple practice: take 5 minutes at the end of a day when you felt the urge to defend yourself and ask what would actually have happened if you'd said nothing. Not in an abstract, I should be more zen way. Run the actual scenario. Would your reputation have changed? Would the outcome have been different? 9 times out of 10, the answer is no. The explanation you gave didn't change what the other person thought. It just made you feel like you'd done something. Sitting with that regularly starts to loosen the grip. And if you're past 50, you probably already have more evidence than you realize that your reputation doesn't live or die in any single conversation. You've survived being wrong. You've survived being challenged. The track record is already there. Buzheng gets easier the moment you actually trust what you've already built, rather than treating every room like a place where it could all be taken away. The next time someone comes at you, the most powerful move is giving them nothing to push against. That's the whole system. Pick one moment this week where you'd normally explain yourself and try the 3-part method instead. Subscribe and drop a comment on what's made that hardest for you before.